Hello everyone, welcome back to Ancient Wonder. Today, we're diving into a truly fascinating topic that might completely change the way you see the world. Stay with us until the end, because what you're about to discover is surprising, mysterious, and incredibly interesting. Think of the wildest, most chaotic historical drama you have ever streamed. Remove the Hollywood polish, strip away the fictional dragons, and what you are left with is the dark, unfiltered reality of the early English monarchy. We often envision the founders of empires as pristine statues carved from marble, pristine figures who sat gracefully on golden thrones while issuing enlightened decrees. The reality that history classes conveniently omit is a grotesque tapestry of absolute madness, psychological torment, visceral betrayals, and deaths so bizarre they feel like dark comedy. Imagine a sovereign losing his life because he could not resist a physical brawl with an uninvited dinner guest, or a ruler whose stomach was so ruined that his daily meals became a psychological horror show for his closest servants. Picture a teenage boy who inherited an entire realm, but found his coronation feast so entirely boring that he slipped away to engage in a scandalous tryst with two noble women at the exact same time. This is not a collection of heavily romanticized fables designed to inspire national pride, but rather a sequence of real, messy, and terrifying events that forged a nation out of blood, pride, and sheer human eccentricity. Every single boundary of decency, family loyalty, and royal dignity was repeatedly shattered by the very men who wore the crown. The entire saga of a united England does not begin with a glorious celebration of peace, but rather with a man who achieved the impossible only to spend the rest of his days utterly consumed by a suffocating, soul-crushing wave of psychological guilt. That man was King Athelstan, who took the throne in the year 927 and held on to power until 939, officially cementing his legacy as the first true sovereign of a fully unified England. To the outside world, Athelstan was an absolute titan, a brilliant military strategist, and a political mastermind who successfully hammered the fractured Anglo-Saxon kingdoms and conquered territories into a singular, cohesive superpower. He was celebrated across continental Europe, feared by his enemies, and revered by his subjects as a legendary deliverer. Yet, behind the heavy palace doors and beneath the shimmering weight of his crown, Athelstan was a deeply broken human being who carried a dark secret that poisoned every single moment of his historic reign. The source of his unending nightmare was his own flesh and blood, a younger half-brother named Edwin. When Athelstan first ascended to the throne, his legitimacy was shaky, and whispers of a rebellion began to echo through the cold stone corridors of the royal court. Edwin was quickly accused of being the mastermind behind a treacherous conspiracy to blind the new king and usurp the throne. Whether this political plot was a genuine threat or a completely fabricated lie designed by paranoid advisors remains an unsolved historical mystery, but Athelstan's ultimate response was a masterclass in psychological cruelty. Instead of ordering a standard, public execution that might paint his brother as a political martyr, Athelstan devised a punishment that was infinitely more twisted and agonizingly slow. He commanded his guards to drag Edwin down to the coast and force him onto a small, weathered wooden boat. To ensure that survival was entirely impossible, Athelstan explicitly ordered that the vessel be completely stripped of any oars, sails, or rudders. The prince was pushed out into the treacherous, freezing waters of the North Sea, completely at the mercy of the crashing waves and the howling winds. The psychological torment must have been unimaginable as Edwin watched the shoreline slowly fade into the gray horizon, knowing he was trapped in a floating coffin. According to surviving historical accounts, the elements eventually overwhelmed the small craft, and Edwin either succumbed to the icy depths when the boat shattered, or he grew so utterly mad from desperation and exposure that he voluntarily leaped over the side to end his own agony. The moment the news of Edwin's grim demise made its way back to the royal palace, a profound, irreversible darkness settled over King Athelstan. The political threat had been eliminated, but the price was his own humanity. The first king of all England spent his remaining years trapped in a prison of his own making, desperately trying to buy back his salvation through extreme public penance, massive financial donations to the church, and a lifestyle defined by severe self-denial. He refused to ever take a wife, completely cutting off his own lineage to ensure he would never pass as bloodstained. Crowned to an heir, and he ultimately died completely alone, haunted until his very last breath by the ghost of the brother he sent out to drown. The crown then passed to his younger half-brother, Edmund I, who ruled from 939 to 946 and initially looked like the stable leader the wounded kingdom desperately needed. Edmund was a fierce, highly capable warrior king who successfully crushed dangerous Viking uprisings in the north, established strong strategic alliances, and solidified the fragile borders of the young nation. He was young, dynamic, and deeply respected by his warriors, earning a stellar reputation as a man who could easily defend England from external threats. However, no amount of battlefield brilliance could save him from the sheer absurdity of his own demise, an event that unfolded during what was supposed to be a joyous night of celebration. In the late spring of 946, Edmund was hosting a massive, alcohol-fueled feast at his royal hunting lodge in Pucklechurch, located deep within Gloucestershire. The great hall was packed to the brim with powerful nobles, beautiful women, and loyal soldiers, all drinking heavily and celebrating the enduring prosperity of the realm. Amidst the loud laughter and flowing ale, a shadowy figure slipped past the outer perimeter and walked casually into the crowded hall. This unexpected visitor was a man named Leofa, a notorious criminal and ruthless outlaw who had been formally banished from the kingdom by Edmund himself just a few years prior. Coming back from exile was a capital offense, but walking directly into the king's private dinner party while harboring a criminal record was a level of suicidal audacity that left the entire room momentarily paralyzed. Leofa did not just sneak into the back corners of the hall. He brazenly walked up to the tables, sat down amongst the royal guests, and began aggressively helping himself to the king's expensive food and premium wine. When King Edmund's eyes scanned the room and locked onto the arrogant face of the banished outlaw, the young monarch did not just get angry. He completely lost his mind with rage. Instead of acting like a dignified head of state and signaling his armed bodyguards to quietly arrest the intruder, Edmund allowed his hot-blooded warrior instincts to completely take over. The King of England leapt out of his high chair, stormed across the greasy floorboards, and physically grabbed Leofa by his hair, attempting to personally drag the muscular criminal out into the dirt. It was a fatal, impulsive mistake that turned a royal gala into a chaotic bar fight. As the two men grappled and crashed against the heavy wooden tables, Leofa managed to slip his hand down to his belt and pull out a concealed, razor-sharp dagger. Before the shocked royal guards could even draw their swords, Leofa lunged forward and savagely impaled King Edmund multiple times in the stomach. The hall erupted into absolute chaos as the guards finally swarmed the assassin, hacking Leofa to pieces on the spot, but the damage was already done. Edmund I, the mighty protector of England, bled out onto the floorboards of his own dining room, his life cut short by an exiled party crasher. The sudden, bloody death of King Edmund left the young nation in a state of profound shock, thrusting his younger brother, Eadred, onto the throne in the year 946. Eadred's reign, which lasted until 955, would not be defined by the dramatic steel of the battlefield or the sudden violence of an assassin's blade, but rather by an internal, agonizing physical horror that turned his daily existence into a grueling test of endurance. Eadred suffered from a mysterious deeply debilitating gastrointestinal disease that contemporary chroniclers struggled to fully understand, though modern historians suspect it may have been a severe form of Crohn's disease or stomach cancer. The condition was so intensely agonizing that the King of England was physically incapable of swallowing solid food without experiencing excruciating pain and violent vomiting. In a medieval culture where a monarch's strength was directly tied to his ability to feast heartily, drink heavily, and project physical dominance to his subjects, Eadred's severe physical limitations were a massive political liability. Yet, it was the bizarre, stomach-churning method he devised to cope with this terrible illness that truly cemented his place in the eccentric annals of royal history. Because his body desperately required basic nutrients to stay alive, but his throat and stomach violently rejected any solid matter, Eadred developed a highly specific, grotesque dining ritual. During royal banquets, while his nobles gorged themselves on roasted meats and rich delicacies, the king would sit before a selection of specially prepared dishes. He would take large pieces of meat, place them in his mouth, and chew them thoroughly for an extended period, effectively sucking out all the rich juices, fats, and moisture. Once the food had been completely drained of its liquid sustenance, Eadred would openly spit the chewed, dry, regurgitated mash out of his mouth and into a communal bowl. Then came the part of the ritual that defied all modern concepts of hygiene. And human dignity. The king's loyal inner circle of servants and court attendants would routinely step forward and actually consume the pre-chewed, saliva-soaked leftovers that their monarch had just deposited. Historians still debate whether this nauseating practice was viewed as an immense sacred honor that demonstrated absolute loyalty to the crown, or if it was simply a horrifying occupational hazard that the servants endured out of sheer terror of royal wrath. Regardless of the underlying psychology, attending a formal dinner at Eadred's court must have been an absolute nightmare for visiting foreign dignitaries, who had to politely watch their host regurgitate his meals into a bowl while his staff eagerly ate the debris. Amazingly, despite living with a disease that slowly starved him from the inside out, Eadred was an incredibly effective and fierce ruler. He successfully managed to control the volatile kingdom, repeatedly crushed dangerous rebellions in the north, and managed to die of natural causes related to his illness in 955, proving that a king did not need to swallow his food to rule with an iron fist. The crown was then handed over to a young man who had absolutely no issues with his physical appetite, though his hunger was of a completely different nature. King Eadwig, popularly known to his contemporaries as Eadwig the Fair due to his exceptionally handsome features, ascended to the throne at the tender age of just 15. His brief reign, which lasted from 955 to 959, was almost immediately derailed by an explosive sexual scandal that occurred on the single most important day of his political life. It was the afternoon of his grand coronation, a monumental event where all the powerful bishops, wealthy earldormen, and influential nobles from across England had gathered to pledge their sacred oaths to the teenage ruler. After the lengthy, solemn religious ceremony concluded, a massive, lavish feast was held in the Great Hall to celebrate the new era of Eadwig's rule. The wine flowed freely, the music played loudly, and the entire political elite of the country sat waiting for their new sovereign to raise his glass and address the nation. There was just one massive problem. The king's high chair at the center of the head table was completely empty, and Eadwig was nowhere to be found. As the minutes turned into hours, the initial confusion in the crowded hall slowly morphed into deep offense and political anger. The Archbishop of Canterbury, a stern, deeply religious, and politically powerful man named Dunstan, grew absolutely furious at this blatant display of royal disrespect. Refusing to let the young king humiliate the church and the state on such a holy day, Dunstan stood up from his seat and marched out of the noisy hall. Determined to hunt down the missing teenager. He followed the quiet corridors deep into the private residential quarters of the palace until he reached a secluded bedchamber. Dunstan banged open the heavy wooden door, and the scene that greeted his eyes was scandalous enough to shock the entire medieval world. The 15-year-old king had completely ditched his own coronation feast, so that he could hook up with a beautiful young noblewoman named Elfjafu. To make the entire situation infinitely more bizarre and profoundly inappropriate, multiple historical sources explicitly state that Elfjafu's mother, Etheljafu, was also present in the bedchamber, actively encouraging the scandalous behavior in a desperate, calculating bid to secure royal favor for her. Family line. The crown of England was lying carelessly on the floorboards like a discarded toy while the young king indulged his hormones. Dunstan did not just scold the teenager. He erupted into a righteous, holy fury. Unleashing a torrent of insults at the two women before physically grabbing King Eadwig by his shoulders. In an absolute masterpiece of historical humiliation, the powerful bishop literally dragged the semi-naked, protesting teenage king out of the bedroom, and marched him all the way back to the Great Hall, forcing him back onto his throne in front of hundreds of staring, whispering guests. Eadwig never forgot or forgave the absolute trauma of that walk of shame. Once he consolidated his power, one of his very first acts was to confiscate Dunstan's properties and banish the powerful archbishop from the kingdom entirely. However, the damage to Eadwig's political reputation was completely irreversible, as the story of the coronation scandal spread like wildfire across the country, ensuring that the young king would always be remembered not for his policies or his striking good looks, but for the day he abandoned his country for a secret bedroom encounter. Following the brief and highly scandalous 4-year reign of Eadwig, the throne was handed over to his younger brother, Edgar, who would rule from 959 to 975. History books frequently refer to him by the glowing moniker of Edgar the Peaceful, a title earned because his 16 years on the throne were remarkably free from devastating foreign invasions or massive civil wars. However, the deceptive tranquility of his public title stood in stark, hypocritical contrast to the ruthless, murderous methods Edgar allegedly utilized